How did you get started as a playwright?
I think I've wanted to write all my life. I think reading. I think people start writing because they're readers, really. And I think for a great deal of my kind of childhood and my adolescence, I got a lot of I got a great sense of consolation and a great sense of adventure from reading things. I think kind of reading and writing is it's a process of it's a conversational process between one another. I think all writers have read things in their life that in some way have changed the way they feel about the world, and they want to do that to other people. So that's how I started writing. I never wanted to be a playwright. I wanted to be a songwriter, like the writers who meant most to me when I was growing up. I would say it's not completely true, but there's a truth to it. That I kind of went to the kind of school that if you admitted to enjoying English or literacy, as it's rather perniciously called now, you just get kind of like beaten up. And I don't think you'd actually been beaten up, but you might have had you'd have been heavily mocked for admitting to enjoying James Joyce or Jane Austen or something. But the one literary form you could admit publicly to enjoy was kind of music. So I was born in 1971. Writers like Elvis Costello or Tom Waits or Shane MacGowan, Morrissey before everybody knew as a fascist, Marquis Smith. They're all, I mean, all kind of male writers who helped me make sense of my universe, and I wanted to emulate them. And it was only when I went to university, I started writing songs. I wrote songs for kind of 7-8 years as a teenager. And it was only when I went to university, two things happened. One, I realized that I had a genuinely dreadful singing voice, and so was never going to make it as a singer-songwriter, which, you know, I've still not completely got over. And the other was I started going to the university theatre, the University Drama Society. All the cool kids, all the most attractive girls, all wanted to be actors. And in a pathetic and ultimately entirely futile attempt to meet these cool kids and beautiful girls, I went to watch their really rather dreadful student productions of plays. And although the girls never talked to me and the kids never noticed me, it introduced me to an art form, the potential of which I was really taken by. I think, as I said, when I was growing up, the art form that meant most to me was music, and, you know, rock and roll music, post-punk music, or whatever. The drama I watched was kind of like independent American film or British television in the 80s. Had some really fine writers writing on it. And I remember going to this, what was called the Drama Barn at York University, which was literally a barn that had been converted into a kind of studio theatre. And although the girls never spoke to me, nobody ever spoke to me, and the plays were awful, I remember being startled by the possibility of telling stories in that space that weren't like god-awful student productions of The Real Inspector Hound, or kind of like weirdly cast productions of The Cherry Orchard with 18-year-olds pretending they were 82. But actually you could do something like Taxi Driver or Blue Velvet or The Singing Detective or GBH or Boys from the Black Stuff, which was the type of drama that I'd grown up on. But you could do it live in the room. And it would be a weird cross between the kind of films and TV that I'd loved and a live gig. And that could be remarkable. So I just started writing plays.
Fantastic. I moving more on to Seawall. What was the moment of crystallization for you then when it came to Alex?
Well, there were 3 different things happened. I was on holiday with my wife and my 3 kids, my 2 sons, who are now 22 and 18, but at the time were 8 and 5, and my daughter, who was a little baby, and my father-in-law. Were on holiday in his house on the west coast of France. And then I got an email from Josie Rourke, who was then the artistic director of the Bush Theatre in West London, who needed a play really quickly because they had to close because of terrible weather. And she wanted to keep the theatre open. They needed to do engineering work on their lighting and their seating, but they needed to put plays on in the dark, in the broken space. And she asked me to write a play to be performed in natural light because they didn't have a lighting rig. So, because I like Josie and I like the bush, I agreed to take the commission. Didn't have any idea what I was going to write about. No idea at all what I was going to write about, but just said yes, all right. And she said I need it by the end of September, and I was on holiday in August, and I just agreed. She said it's for one person, for one actor. So there were the restrictions. I think restrictions are quite freeing for artists. Her restrictions is one performer, it's natural light, it's no more than half an hour. I agreed to those conditions and then went back to my holiday. And I was, my father-in-law, you know, it's really lucky that he died a couple of years ago. He had this beautiful house in the South Brittany coast, just on the Atlantic Sea. And we've been there every year for a holiday since me and my wife have got together for 27 years. And there is a little cove you can go to just away from the path of his house. You clamber down the side from the path and go, instead of going on the beach, which can get quite busy, you can just go and swim in the cove. And one day my wife went to the supermarket, and me and Martin took the kids for a swim. First of all, he went for a swim on his own. And he came back in, it was a beautiful sunny day, and he came back in, and I remember his exuberance. And he said, the water's amazing. And it was quite infectious. And he sat down next to me, and I noticed the soles of his feet were really oddly cracked. And I thought, God, he's a lot older than I'd think he is. That's strange. And he said he'd look after the kids while I went for a swim. And I did. I went for a swim. And he was reading a book all holiday. He was reading this history of China. And I just went for a swim and swam out. And I do this thing when I'm swimming. I swim as far as I think is kind of safe. And I'll stop and gather my breath and go, all right, 10 more strokes. Just do 10 more strokes. Turn around, look at where you've got. And I could see him reading his book, dripping from the swim. And I noticed he wasn't paying attention to the kids at all. And I remember thinking, Martin, they're 8 and 5. You've got to pay attention to them, because they were jumping around the rocks. I remember thinking, they could just slip, they could fall. That'd be awful, Martin, pay attention. And then I remember thinking, oh, that's interesting. What if they slipped and fell? And that kind of, and it terrified me, that idea as a parent. The idea that my child might die before me remains the defining terror of every parent, I think. But writers, I think, like to look into the spaces that frighten them most. So I kind of swam back to the shore with this sense of, oh, I think I know what my monologue might be about.
That's incredible. It's a play that comes backwards and forwards about religion. Religion features in it. Or the relationship more kind of like specifically the relationship to God, and that there are two very, very strong views about the existence of God or not within the piece. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it was something that just as a thinker, as a human, just as a person, was fascinating me at the time of writing. I think for most of my, I come from, I guess what could be loosely described as a kind of like Church of England family, but quite a secular kind of family background. My mum was Northern Irish Protestant, and my dad was kind of like Northern English Protestant as well. But like we never went to church ever, apart from funerals or weddings. I think just a faith in God and an understanding that you needed to, God played a kind of like a role in my childhood, which was kind of like a slightly grumpy Father Christmas. And I just didn't believe, by the time I got to 13 years old, I just didn't believe it. I just thought it was, maybe even younger, I remember thinking it was profoundly unlikely. Probably about the same time as I stopped believing in Father Christmas, I kind of stopped believing in God, and maintain this quite atheist position that the human experience, human existence is is fundamentally a biochemical accident. I think we exist in the universe as a consequence of the forces of of the Big Bang, that's continuing to expand the universe, and that we're finite, and that when we die, our body disintegrates, and the fundamental elements of carbon and hydrogen and helium that we're kind of made up of go back into the planet and go back into the ground, and we become food for worms, and from that, food for birds and whatever, and we go back, and our atoms continue in the universe, and our energy continues. I do kind of believe that idea that the energy can't disappear and can't be generated either, but I don't believe that in any kind of supernatural force of heaven or hell, or any kind of life after death. And I guess that interrogation, what is God, plays out in Seawall, and takes the play into a kind of like more philosophical consideration. I think, the I think that paragraph that Arthur has about when he finally tells Alex where he thinks God is, and the notion of it being in the space in between two numbers, or between the light falling on a city at the start or the end of the evening, or the way some people walk, and the roll of the land. Those are things that, even repeating them now, I find kind of quite moving idea, that in that beauty, there is the possibility for the numinous, and there's something spiritual about that. Even the hardened, secular, scientific thinking kind of atheist in me is haunted by that beauty.